Who let him touch the whiteboard? A sharp voice cut through the murmur of students. A young man in a varsity jacket stood with his arms crossed, his mocking laughter echoed by a handful of classmates. On the lecture hall stage, the janitor, a wiry man in his late 50s, stood frozen. He held a dry erase marker, his weathered hand trembling slightly. Behind him, an intricate series of equations filled the board, symbols and numbers cascading in an elegant but unfamiliar sequence. The professor, a grizzled academic in tweed, stared at the board with wide eyes. His jaw worked silently as if he were trying to speak but couldn't find the words. "Get off the stage, old man," another student jeered. "You're not a professor. Stick to mopping floors." But the janitor didn't flinch at the insults. Instead, he stepped back and motioned toward the equations. "If any of you think I'm wrong," he said calmly, "then solve it yourself." A hush fell over the room. The confidence in his voice was undeniable. The crowd of students exchanged bewildered glances, waiting for someone, anyone, to take up the challenge. The soft hum of fluorescent lights filled the empty corridor as Martin Cavanaugh moved methodically down the hallway. The worn soles of his work boots squeaked faintly against the linoleum as he pushed his mop bucket along. He had done this so many times that the act was almost automatic, dipping the mop into soapy water, wringing it out, and sweeping it across the floor in smooth, practiced strokes. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. To most people on campus, Martin was invisible, and he preferred it that way. Students bustled past him every day, their backpacks slung over their shoulders, and their minds preoccupied with exams, parties, and the drama of college life. Faculty barely acknowledged his presence, save for the occasional request to unlock a door or replace a flickering light bulb. Martin didn't mind. He had no desire to be noticed. But there were moments, fleeting and unbidden, when he couldn't help but feel the pang of something deeper. He would pause as he passed by a classroom and hear the lively debates of students, or catch sight of a professor scrawling equations across a chalkboard. Those were the moments that stirred a part of him he had tried to bury long ago. The janitor uniform, with its simple name patch and muted colors, fit Martin like armor. It was a disguise, a way to shield himself from the questions he couldn't answer and the memories he couldn't escape. The truth was, Martin wasn't just a janitor. He was a man with a past, a brilliant mind hiding behind a mop and bucket. Late at night, when the campus fell silent, Martin allowed himself small indulgences. After he finished cleaning the lecture halls, he would linger, staring at the chalkboards and whiteboards still filled with the day's work. Sometimes he couldn't resist picking up a piece of chalk and solving the equations left behind. The feel of chalk between his fingers was a comfort, a connection to a life he had abandoned. He worked quickly and efficiently, erasing the boards before anyone could see. It was a secret ritual, one that kept his mind sharp and his heart tethered to the world he had once been a part of. Despite his self-imposed anonymity, Martin was observant. He knew the students by their routines, the way the girl in the red jacket always arrived 10 minutes early to class, or the boy with the headphones who stayed late to finish his notes. He noticed the professors, too, especially the ones who spoke with passion about their fields. Yet no one noticed Martin. To them, he was just the janitor. Martin told himself that was fine, that he didn't need recognition. But as he cleaned the lecture halls and saw the work left behind, a question gnawed at the edges of his mind. Was this really all his life would be? 20 years earlier, Martin Cavanaugh was a name whispered with awe in academic circles. A professor at one of the most prestigious universities in the country, Martin was on the brink of a breakthrough that could change the field of theoretical mathematics forever. His work on quantum computing had already garnered significant attention, but it was his upcoming paper that promised to cement his legacy. At the time, Martin was a different man, confident, driven, and full of purpose. He was also a devoted husband and father, married to his high school sweetheart, Elena, and the proud dad of a bright, precocious 6-year-old named Lily. His family was his anchor, the reason he worked late into the night and poured every ounce of energy into his research. But life has a cruel way of dismantling even the most carefully built plans. One rainy evening, Elena and Lily were driving home from a birthday party when their car was struck by a drunk driver. The crash was devastating. Martin received the call just as he was finishing a lecture, and by the time he reached the hospital, it was too late. Both his wife and daughter were gone. The months that followed were a blur of grief and numbness. Martin withdrew from his work, unable to focus on the equations that once brought him joy. The university tried to support him, offering extended leave and counseling, but nothing could fill the void left by Elena and Lily. Eventually, Martin walked away from his position, abandoning his research and disappearing from the academic world. He sold his home, gave away most of his possessions, and drifted from city to city, taking odd jobs to survive. His mind, once sharp and celebrated, became a burden he couldn't escape. Years passed, and Martin found himself in Redwood, a small university town that seemed as good a place as any to start over. When he saw the job posting for a janitor at Redwood University, he applied without hesitation. The position offered a steady paycheck and the anonymity he craved. To the outside world, Martin was just another man struggling to make ends meet. But beneath the surface, he was a man grappling with immense loss, trying to find meaning in a life that felt irreparably broken. Life as a janitor at Redwood University was monotonous but predictable, and Martin found solace in its routine. Each morning he woke before dawn, brewed a cup of coffee in his tiny studio apartment, and walked the 2 miles to campus. By the time students began trickling in, he was already cleaning the lecture halls, his movements efficient and unobtrusive. For the first few months, Martin kept his head down, avoiding unnecessary interactions, but as the weeks turned into months, he began to notice the peculiarities of university life. He watched as students rushed to class with barely a minute to spare, their faces alight with the excitement of youth. He overheard snippets of conversations about exams, relationships, and late-night study sessions. Though he kept to himself, Martin couldn't ignore the pull of the academic environment. Late at night, when the campus was quiet, he found himself lingering in the lecture halls. The equations and problems scrawled across the boards were like old friends, beckoning him to engage. One evening, while cleaning a particularly cluttered classroom, Martin noticed an equation on the board that caught his attention. It was a complex problem, one he recognized from his own studies years ago. Without thinking, he picked up a piece of chalk and began solving it. The movements came naturally, his mind working faster than his hand. When he finished, he stepped back and stared at the board. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of the joy he used to know. He erased the solution before leaving, but the feeling lingered. From then on, solving equations became a nightly ritual. It was a private act, a way for Martin to reconnect with the man he once was. One night, Martin encountered a problem unlike any he had seen before. It was scrawled hastily across the board, half erased but still legible. The equation was a theoretical problem that had stumped mathematicians for decades, a challenge Martin recognized immediately. His heart raced as he picked up the chalk. The problem was intricate, demanding his full attention, but Martin felt alive as he worked through it. Hours passed as he filled the board with symbols and numbers, the solution taking shape with each line. When he finally completed the problem, he stood back, breathless. It was beautiful, elegant in its simplicity, yet profound in its implications. Martin erased his work as always, leaving no trace of his presence. The next day, Professor Adler discovered the erased problem and was stunned. He shared it with colleagues, sparking a campus-wide mystery about the identity of the solver. The professors dubbed the anonymous solver the ghost mathematician. For weeks, the faculty speculated about the solver's identity, believing it to be a visiting scholar or a prodigious student. Meanwhile, Martin continued his nightly ritual, unaware of the growing buzz around campus. The mystery surrounding the ghost mathematician grew. Redwood University became abuzz with speculation as more complex equations were left solved on the boards overnight. Professors Adler and Ramirez, who spearheaded the investigation, were determined to uncover the genius behind these solutions. The situation reached a turning point one evening when a graduate student named Chloe, pulling an all-nighter in the library, spotted Martin entering a lecture hall with his cleaning supplies. Curiosity piqued, Chloe followed him quietly. From the doorway, she watched in awe as Martin erased a solved equation and replaced it with an elegant solution to a different problem. Chloe gasped aloud before she could stop herself. Martin froze, chalk in hand. "You're the ghost mathematician?" Chloe whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and admiration. Martin's face flushed. He tried to downplay the situation, mumbling an excuse about cleaning the boards, but Chloe wasn't convinced. "You solved that," she insisted, stepping closer. "Do you have any idea what this means? Who are you?" Cornered, Martin admitted to solving the equations, but begged Chloe to keep it a secret. "I'm just a janitor," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "Please, let it stay that way." But Chloe couldn't let it go. She had stumbled upon something extraordinary, and she knew the world deserved to know the truth. Despite Martin's pleas, Chloe couldn't resist telling her mentor, Professor Adler, about what she had witnessed. Adler was skeptical at first, but decided to investigate further. He set up a hidden camera in the lecture hall, intending to catch the ghost mathematician in the act. The next night, Martin unknowingly walked into the trap. As he solved yet another complex problem, the camera recorded every detail. When Adler reviewed the footage, he was stunned. By morning, the truth was out. The news spread like wildfire. The janitor was the mysterious genius who had been solving the unsolvable. Students and faculty were shocked. Some were skeptical, dismissing it as a hoax, while others marveled at the revelation. Martin became an unwilling celebrity on campus. Students began whispering and pointing whenever he passed, and professors started inviting him to lectures. The sudden attention was overwhelming for a man who had spent years hiding in the shadows. Not everyone was kind. Many students mocked Martin, treating him like a novelty rather than a person. Some left rude notes on the chalkboards, while others openly doubted his abilities. "Sure, he solved a few equations," one student scoffed. "But he's still a janitor. What does he know about real academics?" The ridicule hurt, but Martin tried to endure it. He reminded himself that he didn't care about recognition or approval, yet deep down the cruel words stung. One afternoon, during a particularly harsh confrontation in the cafeteria, a group of students jeered at Martin, calling him a fraud. He stood silently, refusing to engage until Chloe stepped in. "Enough!" she snapped, her voice cutting through the din. "This man has accomplished more than any of you can dream of. Show some respect." Her defense silenced the crowd, but Martin knew the damage was done. As Martin's notoriety grew, so did the questions about his past. Professors and students alike began digging into his background, trying to understand how a janitor could possess such knowledge. When Professor Adler finally uncovered Martin's history as a celebrated mathematician, he was floored. He invited Martin to his office for a private conversation. "You've been hiding a remarkable gift," Adler said, sliding a file across the desk. "Why?" Martin hesitated before telling his story, the tragic loss of his family, his descent into grief, and his decision to leave academia behind. By the end, Adler sat in stunned silence. "You've been through so much," he said finally, "but you have a second chance now. Let us help you." Adler convinced Martin to return to the academic world, starting as a guest lecturer in his department. The first day Martin stood before a classroom again, he felt a familiar thrill. Though nervous, he quickly found his footing, and by the end of the lecture, the students were hanging on his every word. The transition wasn't easy. Martin struggled with self-doubt, haunted by memories of the life he had lost. But with Chloe's encouragement and Adler's mentorship, he began to rebuild his confidence. Over time, Martin's lectures became the highlight of the semester. Students flocked to his classes, eager to learn from the man who had solved the unsolvable. Martin poured his heart into teaching, determined to inspire the next generation of mathematicians. His work didn't go unnoticed. A prestigious journal published one of his papers, and he was invited to speak at an international conference. For the first time in years, Martin felt like he belonged. But the true moment of redemption came when a student approached him after class, tears in her eyes. "You've changed my life," she said. "I never thought I could understand this stuff, but you made it click. Thank you." The journey wasn't without its challenges, but Martin had come full circle. He was no longer defined by his past or his grief. Instead, he was a man who had risen from the depths of despair to find purpose again. On the day of the international conference, Martin stood before an audience of thousands. He took a deep breath, glanced at the photo of Elena and Lily he always carried, and began his presentation. The applause that followed was thunderous. But it wasn't the recognition that mattered to Martin. What mattered was the knowledge that he had found his way back, not to who he was, but to who he was meant to be.